Hi, everybody. I'm Paul.
And I'm Michelle.
And you're in
The
Spooky
Coop.
Welcome to the Spooky Coop. Hope you're not chicken.
So, Michelle, I hear you have a story for us today.
I always have a story for us. I cracked a chicken egg, and inside the egg was a story. And this is an interesting story because the chickens must have been on the ball today, because it's a story that actually happened to us this weekend when we were out in Maine. Do you remember that?
I sure do.
Well, let me tell all of our listeners because they probably don't know about it. This weekend, we were out in Maine because it was our anniversary. And while we were out in Maine, we stopped at our favorite little clam shack. Now, I'm not going to tell you the name of the place because I don't want everybody running out there. And actually, they told me not to tell because they don't want everybody running out there for this reason. They'd love everybody to run out there and buy their awesome clams and steamers and lobster. But they don't want everyone running out there for other reasons because just down the way from them, somebody found out that place was haunted, and they told us that that place is having a terrible time with a whole bunch of people showing up, insisting on going down here and down there and wanting to investigate and yada yada, and just buying a cup of coffee. So they're not making a lot of money on their ghost story. But here's what happened. Paul and I were sitting there having the big fish dinner. Oh, was it good? And the girl serving it saw that we were sitting there and we were taking notes about our last interview we had with somebody in the area. She saw that we were writing down these notes about this ghost story we were told. And she said, "You guys are into ghosts?" And we said, "Well, yeah." And she said, "I have a ghost story to tell you." And here's what she told us. She said that her mother and her grandmother and herself work at this, let's call it clam shack, during the summer. And her mother and her grandmother go off to Florida when it's winter up here in New England. And she goes to school. She's a college student. So she goes to school when it's fall. But they all get back together during the summer and they work in the clam shack. And her grandmother has been working there for decades, her mother for several decades, and her now since she's been she said 17. Didn't she say 17?
I think so.
Yeah. So I think she said she was like 22. And she's worked there for years now. And she told us that one day she was working late, which she often does because her and her grandmother and her mother are like trusted employees there. So they always close the place or open the place or whatever. They're very trusted there. And she said one night she was working really late and she and her grandmother were working together to close the place. And while she was working, she had to take all the trash out. And you take the trash out there by going down the back steps, like 6, 7 steps, and walking down this long hallway and throw everything in the dumpster in the back. So she had a couple of bags of trash she was bringing out to the back dumpster, and she heard someone following her. She thought it was either her grandmother or maybe one of the younger kids that they hire just for the summer season, like summer help. So she said, "You could help me carry one of these things," and she turned around to give one of the bags to whoever was following her, and there was nobody. And so she started walking again, and she heard the steps again. She turned around again, and there was nobody. And she kind of got the creeps. But, she's thinking, it's all in my mind. So she walks down the hall a little more. I guess it was kind of a long hallway. And the office of the manager was on this hallway. And it should have been dark inside and locked up. But instead, the door was open and the lights were on. She thought to herself, I've got to make sure that when I come back, I close those lights and I lock the door. But she was right at the back door. Because, that's where they kept the accounts and everything. So she walked out She threw the garbage out, making sure that she left the back door open so she'd get back in. And then she walks over to close the manager's door. And she walks in and she swears to God she saw this guy behind the desk. He was dressed up in like this shirt with short sleeves that had blue stripes and white stripes on it. And he had this paper hat that folded in the middle like you'd see if you were watching a 1950s TV show.
Yeah.
That was like a triangle shape and not triangle shape, what's that? A rectangle shape, and it's had little stripes on it.
If
and
viewers could see the gesticulations you just went through trying to describe the details of this hat.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, he looked like he just came out of the 1950s, and he was, like a guy who would serve ice cream or something in the 1950s or 1940s. And she looked at him. She was like, "What are you doing here? Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And he looked at her, and he was holding one of the accounting books. She got like, "You're not supposed to be here." All of a sudden, he started walking towards her like he was going to push her out of the door, like pushing her out of the office. And then he was gone. It's like he vanished in front of her. And her mind couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
So she started looking around the room to see if anything was missing and to see where he was, and everything was fine. Even the book he was holding was actually in the drawer of the desk. So after a few minutes, she closed the light, made sure the door was locked. She said she was shaking all over. She thought she was going to be sick.
Yeah.
And she knew he couldn't have gotten past her, even though he looked like he was going to push her. She didn't feel, but she was wicked sick. And she went upstairs to where her grandmother was, and she explained what I just said to her grandmother. And her grandmother laughed, and she said, "Ha, you've been here more than 5 years, and that's the first time you saw Henry?" And her grandmother just laughed and laughed. And she's like, "Who's Henry?" And she was, "Oh, he's the guy who built this place long, long time ago. Yeah, I worked with him when I was just a little girl here. He died a long time ago. He still haunts the place. Next time you see him, tell him Yvonne said hi." Isn't that amazing? You remember? Yeah, you remember? And then she was like, "But don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone I told you, because if they find out this place is haunted, my mother's going to kill me." That was so funny. But really, I'm not going to tell you who they are, but you'll know if you find the best steamers in Maine. And if you guys don't know what steamers are, they're clams that they just steam until the shells open up. And here in New England, we clean the skin off the neck and we dip them in the clam juice, and then we dip them in butter and we eat them.
Delicious.
Yeah,
Absolutely
they're very delicious, but they are hard.
Big plug for Maine.
Yeah,
Go
big
get some
plug for
steamers.
Maine. But the steamers, most people like from other parts of the country or other parts of the world have a hard time with them.
And when you're here, call them steamers.
Steamers, yeah.
When you come to New England, you must sacrifice all of your R's.
Yeah,
from
and
every
half
word.
of your H's.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, you have a story for us?
Yes, I have a story.
Okay.
And this is a story about our friends John and Mary. So you're a little
hi,
bit.
John. Hi, Mary, if you're listening.
So you're a little bit familiar with this already, but it was a fascinating and rather, what would you call it, mystique-filled honeymoon.
Oh, yeah, they had the coolest honeymoon.
They had the most unique and coolest honeymoon. So John and Mary, they got married, and a couple of days after the wedding, they went off and headed to Vermont. And they did it very spontaneously. They made no reservations anywhere. They just said, "We're going to Vermont for our honeymoon," and took off. That's just the way they were.
They're still like that.
They're still like that, yeah. So they get up into Vermont, and they find this really wonderful bed and breakfast. It's in old middle Vermont, north of, I think, Brattleboro.
Yeah.
And this absolutely wonderful, they said it was a spectacular bed and breakfast. And they stayed there. So they have dinner. Food's great. The view and the stars are wonderful. It's warm. It's the summertime. They go upstairs and they scored this beautiful honeymoon suite that had this fabulous huge jacuzzi in it. So they're sitting in the jacuzzi and they're having.
She didn't drown him.
She didn't drown him. No. Why would she drown him?
Oh, that's just she's that type. Just out of fun.
So John is facing the window, and she's facing the other way, and she had to get out for a moment, he said, and went to get something. And as she's out, he's looking through the window that's right behind her. There's these open Venetian blinds, and sees this ball of light fly across the sky, stop in the middle of the window, then go back in the same direction that it had just come from. Like zip, zip, and it was gone. John goes, "Mary, did you see that?" And she says, "No, what are you talking about? I just saw this ball of light, a plane or something, but it wasn't a plane. It was a ball of," he said, "gold light come out halfway across the window and zip back." So being the enthusiasts that they are, they stop everything and they go out to see if they can see more of these lights. And then as they're driving around, there's this hill that's got a view of the valley over where they're staying. They're out there standing for a while talking and looking out over the valley. And suddenly there's this big thing that's like covered in lights. He said it was like covered in Christmas tree lights, but there were hundreds of them. And it was the shape of a large oval. And it flew over them. Just feet, he said. They were probably 10, 20 feet above them, and there was absolutely no sound.
Wow.
And as it flew over, it wobbled to the left and then to the right, like it was waving. And then it stopped, and it continued to silently float down across the valley, and they watched it as it just disappeared into the distance.
Wow.
He said it was absolutely amazing. He'd never seen anything, and certainly never heard anything that was completely silent like that. Mm-hmm. And he said it was good size. It was a large object.
And what did she say about it?
She repeated the same sentiments about it. The only thing that she said was that she thinks that John thought for the longest time it was one of those gliders that someone might fly at night.
And put all kinds of Christmas lights on it.
For some crazy reason. And that it took him a couple of years to come to terms with the fact that it was probably not a terrestrial object, but something from somewhere else, some other thing.
Yeah.
And that is the story of John and Mary's honeymoon.
Well, that's a really cool story. We gotta call them. We haven't talked to them in a while. We should call them, see if there's any updates in their life with the weird things going on. Yeah. I've got a couple of more stories I think you guys are going to like. Now, this one, I've heard stories like this before, and so they might not be as rare as you might think. Now, this one came from a friend of my sister's. My sister is a nurse, and this person is also a nurse, but they work in totally different fields, but I guess they might have gone to school together. Now, this person is a dental nurse. She works with an oral surgeon, and she works taking care of patients, I guess, when they're knocked out. And she says that a lot of times they do kids with wisdom teeth. She was saying it is so funny. She cannot tell you what kids do when they're coming out of anesthesia, especially teenagers. She said that if these kids were really who they say they are, she's got millions of free tickets to Mariah Carey. She's met Mariah Carey a dozen times and has free tickets to concerts from everyone from Britney Spears to, these kids are half awake and they think that they're their heroes. So it's cute.
Super embarrassing moments.
Yeah, super embarrassing moments for the kids. Or some kids will say, where are my arms? I can't find my arms, or whatever. And she really said these kids are really adorable when these things happen, and they're always slurring their words like they just came out of this
a
chemical.
Saloon. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And she really loves her job. She loves kids. She loves her job. And she kind of gets a kick out of the things the kids say. One day, though, a couple of years back, and I've heard stories like this before, so I guess it's not that rare. And maybe these are spirit guides or guardian angels or something that are using these kids because they're in a state where they can. One time, a couple years back, she had this boy who had just had 2 wisdom teeth taken out. His mother was, waiting for him, but he had to come out of the anesthesia, and he was really, really groggy. And then in a clear voice, like he was not groggy at all, he said, "You must go home now." And then all of a sudden he became groggy again.
Ooh, chilling.
Yeah. And then he started, with his grogginess and everything. And she was really, really spooked out. But she, had been with a lot of kids who said a lot of weird things, They even thought they gave her autographs. She's like, "Oh, yeah, I'll take that." And then they pretend, they thought they were actually signing an autograph and stuff. So she didn't know what to make it because he got so serious. And something inside her said, maybe I should go home now. So after she got his mother all set and everything, she talked to the other nurse that was working there, and then she talked to her boss, the surgeon, and she said, "Can I just take an early lunch? I just feel like I have to go home. I'll be right back. I just got to check this out." And the doctor's like, "Hey, if you believe in superstition, go, Mm-hmm. So she went. And when she got home, she saw fire coming out of the top of her attic windows.
Ooh.
So she ran into the first floor. She grabbed her cat. She grabbed her most important documents. And she grabbed some photos. And she got them out of the house just as the top part of her house exploded. So the attic exploded and the fire started to fall into her second story. Some of her neighbors must have saw this and they called the fire department because as she was coming out of the house, the fire department showed up and the police and the EMTs and everything. I mean, she was safe. She got her documents, and what she was most happy is that she saved her cats. They were able to get the fire out in time that she was able to salvage the house.
Really?
Yeah, she was able to it cost a lot to get the repairs done.
I bet it did.
Yeah, but it wasn't a complete loss. But if she
Thank goodness.
if she didn't take the advice of go home now, her cats probably would have died of smoke inhalation, and all the most important things, her documents she needed, and all of the pictures of everyone, her grown-up children and everything else, her grandchildren, all those pictures and everything would have been destroyed by the water damage.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And so she
If
was
not the
really
smoke and
pleased.
flame.
Yeah. Well, the flames were all upstairs, but she was really, really happy that she did that.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet she was.
Yeah. So that was that story, and I thought that you guys might find that interesting. I have a couple of others if you guys want to hear them. They're not all long stories, but they are interesting stories, I think. For example, there was another person, a person that used to live next door, and we were talking about creepy stories. She was a child of the late 60s, early 70s. And she used to hitchhike to go where she wanted to. It was just the way it was back then. Hitchhiking was completely normal. These days, I would not recommend hitchhiking at all.
Not at all, no.
Not at all.
Serial killers everywhere.
Yeah, just look at the toy box killer.
Ugh.
Oh,
let's not.
Yeah, let's not. But in that day, hitchhiking was really common. If you wanted to go somewhere, like let's say you lived in town, you wanted to go to the beach, you could hitchhike towards the beach. Anyway, this girl wanted to go from her house in the state of New York, and she wanted to go to Florida. So she put her thumb out, figuring that somebody will pick her up, and she'll drive as far as she can with that person. They'll drop her off, and then she'll start hitchhiking again, and they'll pick her up, and, sort of like that, like leapfrogging down her way.
Yeah.
Well, somebody had dropped her off, and so she was on the side of the highway, and she had her backpack and a sleeping bag and, some food with her, and she had her thumb out, and some guy pulls over, and he pulls over maybe 10 feet away from her, and so she runs up towards him and asks him where he's going. And he says, so where are you going? And she says, I'm heading to Florida. And he says, well, that's funny because that's where I'm going. I can drive you out there. She's like really excited because she's like only halfway to Florida.
Right.
And she's thinking, that's a great, great ride.
Yeah.
I'm going to get all the way to Florida.
Right.
So he says, why don't you jump in the back seat?
No strings attached.
Yeah, nothing's ever no strings attached. But he says to her, why don't you jump in the back seat? And she's thinking that's really odd because 99.99% of hitchhikers get in the front seat. It's usually, why don't you throw your stuff in the back seat or your stuff in the trunk and you jump in the car. And in that day, you used to jump into the front seat with them, unless there was somebody else in the front seat. And she said that's how it was, So she felt kind of uncomfortable, but what the heck. And then she went to pick up her stuff, walk back the 10, 12 feet or so to go get her stuff, and somebody appeared to her. She said that there was this cloudy area in front of her.
Oh, like an apparition?
Yeah, like an apparition. And a woman all glowing appeared to her. And she thought like this angel appeared to her, but she didn't see any wings. But this beautiful woman appeared to her. Mm-hmm. And the woman said, don't get in his car. He has a gun and he will kill you.
Ooh.
I mean, this was the day of love and drugs.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she didn't know if it was the woman real or if it was a hallucination because of what she's been doing. Mm-hmm. She walked back to his car and she said to him, hang on a minute, I just have to go to the bathroom. And so she, with the idea that she was going to go in the woods. But then when she looked in the front seat of his car, she saw a jacket on the seat was kind of askew, and she could see, if she looked carefully, the butt of a gun stuck out under the jacket. And then she went into the woods, because she was in the woods thinking, probably also going to the bathroom, but she came out and she looked at the guy and she said, I don't need a ride after all. The guy just looked at her, called her some vulgar names, hit the gas and left. Mm-hmm. And so she waited for the next ride. Right. And she was okay. And she knows that vision saved her life. Yeah. Then she also said that same highway, sometimes later, they found a body of a dead girl along the side of the road. And she said that could have been her had she gone with the man. Yeah. She's sure of it. So that's an interesting story too. I mean, was it her angel? Dead
relative, grandmother.
Yeah, it could very well have been a guardian angel. Oh, and I have another really, really weird story. Now, this story, I'm a strange person. I really am. I could get in an elevator on the 10th floor of a building, and by the time the doors open on the first floor lobby, the person I was in the elevator with will tell me their life story or tell me something weird that happened to them. And this is how I heard this story. I was actually sitting at the DMV waiting to get my license renewed. And a fellow, he was...
For those of you who don't know, the DMV is the Division of Motor Vehicles.
Yeah, Division of Motor Vehicles, waiting to renew my driver's license. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there next to this guy from England, and we started a conversation. Actually, he kind of started the conversation, which is often the way. Next thing you know, he's telling me about this weird phenomenon that happened where he grew up. Now, we were talking about driver's licenses, and then next thing you know, he's telling me that he grew up on this row of houses. They call them row houses there, but over here, we'd call them like attached or semi-detached housing. And so there was rows of town housing. Now, in his place that he grew up, it was like government housing. So you just couldn't move out if you wanted to. You had to get permission from the government to move you to another house, which is kind of weird. But that's how it was back. So his family couldn't just up and move. And he said whenever there was a lot of rain, which I guess happens quite a bit in England, whenever there was a lot of rain, actual rocks, would fall on those houses. Rocks. They didn't fall on any other houses in the neighborhood.
Just those houses.
Just that row of, I think he said 8 houses.
You develop a complex after what you'd be thinking your neighborhood is damned.
Yeah, but only
God
those
is
houses.
smoting you.
Only those houses.
Right.
And some of them were pebble size, and some of them were the size of your fist.
Oh, that would do a lot of damage.
Yeah, he said that they had wiring, like the stuff that you'd put cement on if you were building.
Oh, like rebar. Yeah.
It wasn't as strong as rebar.
The mesh stuff.
Yeah, the mesh stuff.
Understand.
And they put that over the house's roofs to stop the roofs from being destroyed.
Right.
And they had plywood and everything because every single time they had more than a rain shower, these rocks would fall down on their houses.
Right.
And people saw it and they reported it over and over. And all they could do, they did studies, the government came in and did studies, and, and they said, well, the rocks must be picked up from this or that place where rocks were nearby, and the rain clouds pick them up and then drop them on your house.
A cloud picks up a rock.
Yeah, and it drops them. This isn't frogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they said the atmosphere is picking them up and dropping them only on your houses. And for years, he grew up with this. And the council would not let them move out of that house for some reason. They couldn't get themselves out. Now, he lived with a single mom. It was him and his sister and a single mom. And I just got this from sitting in the DMV with him. He used to stop at his sister's class and wait, and they'd come home from school together. One day they were coming home from school, and at the end of the row house, where there were police and there was fire engines there and police there, they went up and their mother was standing there, and they said, "Mom, what's going on?" The mom said, "You got to stand back." And then he found out later on, that the old man who lived in that last place, who had been there forever, had spontaneously combusted. Human spontaneous combustion.
He just blew up into a ball of flame and burned to a crisp.
He was sitting in a chair, listening to the radio, watching TV, doing something, and the fire alarms or something went off, some kind of fire.
Yeah.
And when they got there, only his feet and hands were left.
He blew up into a ball of fire.
They said the whole place was full of smoke in the room he was in.
Just him.
And just ashes on the chair. And only his feet and his hands were left. This is what the guy told me. I wasn't there.
Imagine if his eyeballs were left.
Ooh. Anyway, this is what the guy told me.
We digress. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen things like this in books.
Right.
But anyway, he said after that happened, not one rock ever fell on that place again.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. He says that was so weird. Not one rock
It sounds like a smoting to me.
A smoothing from God.
God smote somebody.
Anyway, that was my visit at the DMV. After that, I thought that when they took my picture, that I'd just be this pile of ash with hands. But this is what happens.
Yeah.
But I thought that was an amazing story. And I said, "Are you sure this is true?" Every last word. So that's pretty much from the Coop this time. Stay tuned for episode 9 coming at you soon with a lot more stories from the
Spooky Coop.